weekend, who I'm sure has got a lot to say. How are we doing, Arian? How you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm all right. I'm pretty relaxed. I think relative to most people after that performance, I'm pretty happy. I'm still pretty optimistic, which I think people a lot of times I get labeled as needlessly positive. I think it's unfair because under Conte, I don't think I was ever needlessly positive. I called for his head when I saw it fit. I criticized him, and there's many criticisms I can think of right now. But overall, I'm feeling positive, optimistic, and I'm here. I'm happy to explain why. So I'm ready to get into it.
So, for you, first of all, just start with tonight. What do you think went wrong specifically? Was there anything special, different about tonight, or is it just the same things we've been, struggling with in recent weeks?
Same things. It's the overarching problem that has been haunting us all season is inconsistency, right? And today was another day, just a bad day at the office. That's been happening way more times than we want to. It's horribly inconsistent. But I think the thing that people haven't quite come to terms with is when you're trying to, go through a rebuild of the magnitude that Ange has on his hands. Inconsistency is the thing that you have to accept. It's the problem that you're going to have to deal with. So I'm not happy. I don't think the performance is good. There's a million things we can talk about: the set pieces, we can talk about the mentality, we can talk about the effort, we can talk about the attack, we can talk about all of that. And all of it had many problems. And as you said, why doesn't it look like the same football we saw in the first 10 games? And it's because of inconsistency. It's because of lack of cohesion. It's all these things that any other team that's rebuilt will tell you that they have to go through. Look at Arteta's Arsenal. People will look at the first two seasons where they finished eighth, but I really think if you look at the way Arsenal progressed, the season that they broke out and you saw the potential they had under Arteta was the season we beat them to fourth. That was the season that they finished. That was the season where everybody said this is the Arsenal team with the ceiling. And that season, they lost games horribly in some patches. Aston Villa, they lost 3-0 to Aston Villa at some point. That was a big moment in my head. They lost 2-0 to Newcastle on the back end of the season when we ended up getting that finish over them. And those inconsistent moments were characteristic of Arteta's Arsenal side during the season where we saw what they were capable of. And Ange has gotten us to that season, which Arteta took 3 seasons. In one season, we're now 5th place. We're on a similar point position to Arsenal. And we're suffering from the same problems, but we're also getting the same benefits and the same signs of positivity. In that we see, even though some games it looks like no one has any idea what they're doing, the general team, and everybody knows what Ange is. We have that identity. But some games we don't show it. Some games we don't apply it. And that's natural in a team that's only been together for less than a year. So,
can I ask a question, Arian? Can I ask a question? You did say in when you were there talking that you were unhappy at some parts. In particular, if we're just going to focus on this game, not the whole season, just on this game alone, what parts of today were you unhappy with?
The tempo. I think the tempo is what, I think on Sunday, the reason I was so upset and the reason I was so gutted is because I thought we played so well because we played with a high tempo. We completely pressed Arsenal and we took the game to them. Today, we didn't do that, right? Everybody's going to say the set pieces, and of course set pieces were crap, but I think set pieces are a lot more manageable to deal with because I can see what problems we're having, and I'll get into that later. But for me, what the problem was the strength of an Ange side is to play with high tempo and to take the game to the opponent and to completely kill them, not with death by 1,000 passes, but we're too fast for you. You can't touch us. And we didn't do that today. We let Chelsea breathe. That's the problem. We didn't suffocate them. We suffocated Arsenal, and they were very lucky not to get punished. But today, we completely gave all the space and all the game. We let Chelsea relax. We let Cucurella look like the best defensive left back in the league, and that's because he had the time to think about what he was doing. We didn't, like you said, we fizzed the ball across. They almost scored an own goal. We didn't ask these questions where they have to think on the spot, think on their feet. Chelsea didn't have to think on their feet today.
I completely agree, and I think it's almost as if, like, at the moment for Tottenham, when we play very quickly into the front line and then we get it to like Brennan Johnson or we get it to the left winger in space and then we get those balls across the face of goal, then we look dangerous. We did that a few times today. Petrovic had to get a hand on it. But apart from that, it's almost as if we don't have a different method of attacking at the moment. Is that not a problem?
I think it's a problem, but I think it's a problem that's natural in the process that we're, undertaking. I think that's a problem that we should have all expected seen coming. It's a problem that doesn't surprise me. You look at, again, I'm going to use Arteta's Arsenal because I think they're kind of the blueprint everyone uses for a rebuild. You look at them in the first 3 seasons, and again, particularly that 5th season, they had the identity, and a lot of their fans clung on to certain goals they scored. I know they scored one against Southampton where the ball really was back to front, great goals. And those are the goals they cling on to because it's the thing that gives them identity as a team. But as Arsenal have progressed over the years, the reason that they've separated themselves from the team that finishes fifth into a team that's challenging for the title is because they figured out as a team ways to score more. Look at how good they're at set pieces now. The set pieces have not been a staple of the Arsenal side for the last 5 years. Now they're working on the set pieces. Now they're working on. Last season, there was a lot of last-minute shots from outside the area and stuff. Those things come with time after you develop your central idea. And I think that's what Ange is alluding to when he's saying, look, it's not a priority. Because Ange's main worry is to establish the identity of the team, and the little parts of it that will allow us to progress to the next level will come in their own due time. Right now, we have to worry about establishing the identity of Tottenham and what Ange ball is and what an Ange team looks like. And I think you're jumping the gun when you're trying to iron out the minute details before you've actually set down the foundation of the house yet. And that's the problem that I think Conte had. That's the problem I think Mourinho had. Is they were so worried about results and so worried about general play that they, instead of trying to establish an identity, they tried to figure out a way to make Spurs capable in every phase of play, which works if you want instant results. But if you want a long-term team that has its identity, that has its way of play, that has something that they can cling on to, it doesn't work because you're so worried about the minute details of a game that you're not worried about your team as a whole. And I think that's what makes Ange the right man for this project.
Arian, just a quick one. Is there anything that concerns you, or no? So actually, let me change that. Is there anything that you look at and you think there's a red flag potential? I know you said a lot of positives, but just to balance things out, do you foresee anything where you're like, oh, geez, you know what? If we don't sort this out, this could go wrong. This could be bad. After watching today's game.
In my opinion, it's too early to look at the negatives, because there are negatives. And I'll tell you, for example, the set pieces is the easiest one to pick out. This could be a problem. But in my opinion, the reason it's too early to look at that negative and say, this is on whoever is because, for example, my opinion on the set pieces is that I don't even think they're a coaching problem. I think it's a personnel problem. I think we have two players who are good in the air, and every other team has 4, 5, or 6. And that becomes a problem when they say, why are we zonal marking? Why are we not man marking? Why is Madison on Dan Burn for the Newcastle goal? And it's because, look, Romero has to be on Isaac. Richarlison wasn't playing that game, so he's our only other player that's even decent on the ball. So we have one player most of the time that starts every single game that's any good in the air. Everybody else is dog shit. When we don't have the personnel to let Ange create whatever team he wants to create, I can't fully look at him and say, you know what, you're doing something wrong. And for example, with set pieces, the reason, again, I'm going to say I don't think they're a coaching problem is it took us about 20 game weeks to concede our first corner. A lot of people, our first league corner that we conceded came in against Everton, I think like game 19, 20, something like that. And the reason that's relevant is I think until Man City figured out that you can hassle Vicario and take him completely out of the equation, nobody was really able to take us out of the set piece. And that's because regardless of our aerial challenges, Vicario was doing very well at that time to get the crosses into and to intercept them because we couldn't rely on our players. So Vicario was able to get in there and help us out a lot. But as soon as Vicario gets taken out of the equation, he's the keeper. He has the biggest reach out of all the outfield players. As soon as he's taken out of the equation, we have to go man-to-man with our aerial players, and we don't have any players who can really challenge in the air outside of Richarlison and Romero. And Richarlison doesn't play every single game. If you put one person on Romero and you put another person anywhere else, Madison can't challenge, Son can't challenge, Van de Ven can't challenge, even though he's 6'4". Udogie can't really challenge. Bentancur maybe, but again, he doesn't play every single game. Sarr can't challenge. Basuma can't challenge. Brennan can't challenge. Kulusevski can't challenge. Even though they're players, they're not very good aerially. So as soon as you take Romero and Vicario out of the equation, personnel-wise, we're dog shit on set pieces because our players can't jump. And that's how simple it is.
Just to clarify something, because the question I asked was, do you see any red flags? I wasn't asking about set pieces, and I do hear your points about set pieces, and some of the points you made are really good. But is there nothing that you thought at all worries you at all? Is there no red flags in anything like that you saw today and you thought this needs to change moving forward? Because I get your optimism, and because I'm an optimistic person as well. I'm positive, and I'm wired that way as well. But just for a bit of balance, that's the reason why I asked the question. Is there something you're like, well, actually, I'm not sure about that. Maybe if these type of things aren't addressed, it's not negative, but I'm just saying, like, certain things where you're like, this isn't quite looking right to me, especially like looking at this Chelsea game. 3 games on a loss. You can understand a lot of fans why they might, be slightly not as positive as you are. So that's why I'm just throwing out that question. So it doesn't necessarily have to be set pieces. and I know we are early into our build, and I know we're looking at other teams, but just focusing on our Spurs. Don't look at any other team. Just looking at Spurs and just come in. Is there something you're like, oh, you can say no, like you're completely happy, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's not that I'm completely happy, because, if I say I'm completely happy, that'll imply that I don't think there's any problems with the team right now. And then the question is, well, why are we fifth? There are problems. And that's why I brought set piece up, because I think that's one of the problems that's easiest to point out. Another problem, for example, would be, I think, especially until today, lack of, dropping players off form. But Madison was dropped, which I think most people were happy to see. So maybe until that. But again, I think you need to be a little bit more harsh on the lineup. But again, doesn't have necessarily the deepest squad to do that. And again, you can go to lack of plan B. I don't really like the plan B thing, because I don't think coaches necessarily should have a plan B. I don't really get the idea of a plan B. I don't think any top teams have plan Bs. You play the way you play. And again, I guess the question is, are there things that are wrong with the Tottenham team? The answer is yes. There's multiple. Again, set pieces, there's easy. So I'm just going to say set pieces. But the reason I'm going to say no, I don't see anything that's a red flag per se, is because I think, he hasn't been given the tools necessarily to mend any of the red flags that we all see, because there's a million of them. And I think that's the same problem with any coach. Mourinho has had, he didn't have the tools. Conte didn't have the tools as much as I was on his case. He didn't have the tools he needed to do his thing. But the thing is, I didn't believe in their thing as much as I believe in Ange's thing. And I think Ange has shown me enough of his thing to say, even the red flags that I see, I believe you can solve them when given the tools. But you haven't solved them now. But I don't think he has the tools. So I'm going to say no to your question. There's no red flags that I see right now that I'm like, you know what? I don't think Ange is the right man for this reason.
But what has happened since the Villa game? Because the Villa game, we win that game 4-0, and we look very much favourites for top four at that point. We've played 7 games since that game. We've lost 4 of them. The only winning 2, those 2 wins being Luton at home and Forest at home. And the other 5 games, we've drawn away at West Ham, lost 3-0 to Fulham, 4-0 to Newcastle, and then 2-0 tonight and 3-2 to Arsenal. So why is it fallen so flat since that Villa game, when that should have been our highest point of the season?
It's a good question. It's horribly inconsistent. I don't know the answer. I can't. I would love to know the answer and say, you know what, it's because of X amount of injuries or X tactics or these individual mistakes. But I can't. And it's been a whole collective of a team underperforming. And there's, you could. I would just chalk it up to inconsistency and a lack of, cohesion in time. Again, this is the same. Again, I'm going to point to Arsenal and their breakout season. They had really poor performances. I think, we beat Aston Villa and we should have propelled off that. But I think Arsenal losing, to me, that was the turning point of their season. Arsenal, the reason that back, it was like 10, 20 game weeks before they ended up choking top 4 to us. But that 3-0 loss to Aston Villa was a really big turning point in their season. And they were able to get some patches, but their whole season was a lot of patches, good patches and bad patches. And we're having a lot of those right now. We had an incredible patch towards the beginning. We had a horrendous patch after the injury crisis. We had a pretty decent revival after the 5 games. But then it's really been up and down. And right now it's massively down. But I think that's just the nature of a rebuild. Like, to me, I think, like I said from the beginning, inconsistency and inexplicable inconsistency is like the main thing you'll have to accept when you're going into a painful rebuild, especially when it hasn't even been a season underway yet. I think that is the main characteristic of any rebuild. You look at Klopp's rebuild, his first season. Like you said, they finished the season off strong, but their season was a lot of patches. Again, Arsenal, like I said a million times, they had patches. Every single team that tries to bend for the long term will start with having ups and downs, and we're on a downturn right now, and I think it's natural.
All right, Arian, look, always great to chat to you, my mate. Thanks
nice one, Arian, man. Respectful.
And appreciate your positivity, and we'll see you again soon.
Of course.
Latest.
And as always, come on!
Nice one, Arian.